Before patch 1.7 dropped, I noticed that a lot of players got very worried about the state of the all high-end build. They feared that because the new classified gear sets arrived with higher main stats, that their beloved hybrid creations would fall out of the meta and become pretty much useless. However, I'm going to say now what I said to those players back then, that is simply not the case. If I look at what kind of build would give me the most value as a solo player, out of all the things in the game, I would probably still pick up an all exotic / high-end build, despite the ninja bike, despite the classified gear sets, and despite the lower main sets that these items come with. Now, I'm not saying that some gear sets aren't better in some roles. You know, the Tactician is probably much better for healing, and the Banshee is probably much better for killing rogues. But the all high-end build does a little bit of everything, and it is just enough to still put it out there as the #1 thing to go for the solo player. Now, I'm not going to advertise this video as if I found something new. The all high-end build or the exotic builds, they have been around since patch 1.5. So I'd say that I'm actually pretty damn late to the party. However, patch 1.7 did change up a few things. And if you're one of those solo Dark Zone players or just a solo player in general, it could be for anything, PvE, last stand, pick your poison. If you're one of those solo players, you're probably gonna want to change up some stuff either way. The game may not have changed a lot, but it did change a little bit. So I figured, hell, right now might be the time for me to jump on this high-end train and use all of these exotics to make my new solo player build. So what do you say? Let's begin. The first thing that might come as a surprise to a lot of people is that I'm running with the Barret vest instead of Vigorous. I have pretty much been saying that Vigorous is the best in slot for the chest piece since patch 1.4, so especially with an all high-end build where you would expect this to fit right in, it should be a no-brainer. But the thing is, I'm not actually running with enough skill power to get much use out of Vigorous. The way I see it is that if you're playing solo, it is absolutely essential that you have a somewhat high damage amount on your weapon. It is simply necessary to burst other players down fast enough before their teammates will be able to help them, before they can press that combat medic or the green link. If you cannot drop someone down from 100 to 0 health within a second or two, then they're just going to run in circles and hide behind their teammates and heal back up, and it's just going to be a mess. And it is for this reason that I spec'd over 7,000 main stats into firearms and then put the rest into electronics. It still doesn't mean that my heals are complete shit though. I mean, yeah, they're not gonna be as powerful as the average player's heals, but to compensate for that, I'm also running with a refreshed mask, which will increase my healing by 30% as long as I use my heal in my last health segment, which I'm gonna do most of the time anyway. The thing is though, even with refreshed, if I'm using my heal in my last health segment, it will still not be enough to heal me to full health. So, if I would be wearing Vigorous here, then I would definitely not be getting an overheal either. So, I hope you can see now that running a combination of Vigorous and Refreshed with my amount of skill power means that either one of those two bonuses will always go to a waste. You know, I'm either not going to get the 30% healing from Refreshed, or I'm not going to get the overheal. And if I have to choose between those two, I think Refreshed is a lot stronger if you're by yourself, which is why I replaced the Vigorous chest piece with a Barret one. The stat rolls on it are pretty much, according to my best in slot guide, we have health, skill haste, and ammo capacity, and then the mask has firearms as well. It has skill power and burn resistance. The knee pads are actually classified Lone Star knee pads with firearms, health, burn resistance, shock resistance, and damage to elites. Now I've got two reasons for running with these Lone Star knee pads instead of the usual short bows that you typically see with these type of builds. The first reason is that these knee pads are actually able to roll with a higher main stat, giving me just a little bit of extra firearms in this case. And the second reason that I'm not running short bows is simply because I dislike short bows in the way that they work, because it doesn't really give the player on the receiving end a chance to react. You know, it usually ends up in a free stun or a free stagger just because you toss the grenade someone's way. I hate it when it happens to me, so I will not be the guy doing it to someone else either. If you want to run short bows with your build, go ahead. This is just a personal adjustment that I made to my build. Not saying it's better, just showing you what I'm doing. Whatever you decide to go with though, make sure that you get disrupt resistance instead of damage to elites if you play a lot of PvP. I could actually reroll this myself as well, since this is a classified item and I still have one reroll left. But this is also the only good set of classified Lone Star knee pads that I have, so I'm keeping this option open for a potential other reroll in case I ever need it for another build. After all, disrupt resistance isn't that important to have either. The backpack is a specialized backpack with firearms, health as the major, and then bleed resistance as the minor. Specialized is of course really good for this build in particular because I'm actually putting a lot of those main stats into firearms. Stamina? Not so much, but combine those two and it's still enough to make it worth running with this. And besides, What else am I going to get here? Inventive doesn't really work because I'm not overhealed all the time. And I don't think there are any other good backpacks left. The skull gloves have electronics, assault rifle damage, skill haste and critical hit chance. Now, a lot of people would actually argue with me to get critical hit damage here instead of the skill haste. And I'm not saying that is wrong, I'm just saying that the skill haste here is a personal preference. So much that I actually rolled away critical hit damage in order to get it. Short cooldowns are such an important thing to have when you're playing solo. Shorter cooldowns means you have more healing, means you have more sustain, and more chance to come out on top during prolonged fights. And yeah, true, the critical hit damage adds a little bit of extra burst to your weapon, but since we don't really focus on crit with this build, as you'll see soon in the video, the impact of critical hit damage on the gloves here isn't as big as you might initially think. Lastly, I'm running with the Blaze holster with skill haste as the major attribute. This holster is actually really good in combination with the R93 pistol, as you can use this to quickly gain some extra damage stacks and then swap back to your main weapon to have more damage on it for a 20-second duration. A lot of people actually don't know this, but the damage increase that you get from landing those pistol shots also apply to your primary and secondary weapon. So if you do it correctly, that's potentially up to 18% extra damage for 20 seconds. That is not something to be overlooked. Now, of course, it's a little situational. It can be a little bit difficult to use mid-fight, but I would actually suggest using it just before you're about to fight, or in between fights when you're maybe running away as a rogue and you got some people chasing you. You know, in that case, you can try to find an NPC, you can quickly stack on him, and then turn around to burst down the players chasing you. It sounds a little bit weird to use it like that, but it actually works really well if you get practiced with it. All of my gear mods are electronics mods with skill haste roll as the major, again to support that short cooldown mentality, and all my performance mods are, well, you guessed it, first aid self-heal mods. I got 3 weapons with this build, 2 lightweight M4s and then the R93 pistol that I talked about earlier, and they're all equally important to this build. First up, we have the main weapon. This M4 has all the damage talents that I want. It has competent, adept and then responsive in the last slot. The second M4, however, has talented, determined and skilled, and I mainly use that gun to farm back my signature skill whenever it is on cooldown in between fights. I hate to say it, but the green link is so key to being successful as a solo player nowadays. Headshots aren't as impactful as they once used to be. Damage resilience talents have been nerfed a long time ago. Hipfire is pretty shit now. Movement is more clunky, and so there aren't a lot of ways that a good player can separate himself from the average player anymore. The game has turned more and more into a stat battle, where you pretty much only trade damage when all your buffs are up and your cooldowns are still available to you. What is so good about the green link though, isn't the healing that you get from it, but the fact that if it automatically revives you, it grants the player with a few seconds of complete invulnerability, where no matter how much damage you take, you simply cannot die. And if you utilize this feature correctly, you can oftentimes catch players off guard and face straight in front of multiple players, knowing that for the next 2 or so seconds, you're not gonna die no matter what. And most of the time, they are actually expecting you to die, so when you then continue shooting after reaching 0 health, you know, they're usually not prepared for it, and you can get away with a sneaky kill on one of them. Since patch 1.7, Determined now works on the signature skill cooldown, and it does stack with skill as well, so if I can get a headshot kill on any of the NPCs, I can get 12.5% of my signature skill back with this weapon. That sounds pretty good, right? And on top of that, I can also use this weapon quickly to kill off a stray rep mob and proc talented for the 20% extra skill power. Oh, and one more thing. Determined also works with skill objects. So if you see a turret or a seeker mine and you can use this weapon to kill that instead of your main weapon, that's another little bonus for you right there. Both of the M4s have the exact same weapon mods. I actually went for headshot damage on both the scope and the muzzle simply because I do not really like the way that hipfire feels this patch. It feels extremely clunky to me, and I always try to turn the fight into an aiming down sight fight at a somewhat longer range instead. I might not get responsive to proc in those cases, but I still prefer to fight that way instead of going into a hipfire battle. And if I'm able to actually get a fight where we both aim down sight, then headshot damage is gonna win every single time. The muzzle actually has critical hit damage because headshot damage cannot roll here. And then for the magazine, I got magazine size, rate of fire, and critical hit chance. You know, the usual stuff as well. The R93 that I have is not only able to increase my damage in combination with the Bliss holster, but it also has Cool Headed on it. And you might not notice, but since patch 1.7, Cool Headed also works on the signature skill as well. So every headshot that you can land with this, either on players or on NPCs, it will help you towards getting that green link up back faster. So yeah, as you can see, with all of these weapons and all of these different talents on all of them, there are plenty of opportunities for the player to get small advantages in one area or another, which when added together will most definitely be the difference that you need between killing those players or being sent back to the checkpoint. The skills and the talents are also something that we should look at, although they are nothing special. I've got the conceal pulse, the booster shot, and as I said, the green link. If you want, you could also go for overdose here. It gives you an overheal even without vigorous. But the booster shot also gives the player 15% damage and 7.5% damage resilience. Admittedly, the damage resilience is pretty throwaway nowadays. 7.5% is almost nothing. But the 15% damage really helps when it comes down to just quickly bursting one guy down before the other ones have a chance to help him out. Talents are triage, critical save, strike back, and on the move. We've already been through these talents a million times for a million other builds, so I'll save you the details, but I'll just say this one thing once more. If you have both triage and critical save equipped, then activating a medkit in your last health segment actually gives the player a proc of triage, even if you're playing solo. And that will lower your skill cooldowns by a flat 15% when you fall to low health. Then, strike back instantly reduces your skill cooldowns by a flat 20% when you fall to low health as well. So what's gonna happen when you're playing solo and you don't have a heal? Well, you're gonna fall to low health, you get 20% of your cooldown back because of strike back. Then you pop a medkit, you get 15% back because of the triage proc, and then you fall to low health again, which gives you another 20% on your cooldown. And if you do it right, most of the time you'll be able to get your heal back because of all the cooldown reduction. And that, guys, that is pretty much the whole build. As I said, it's not something that you haven't seen already. It is the high-end build that we've all come so used to seeing everybody run it, and it just has a few slight variations here and there. If you want to copy those variations, that's up to you. If not, you can adjust this build however you like. And that's the power of the high-end build as well. If you feel like one of these pieces doesn't fit your playstyle, simply swap it out for something that does. There is one thing I do want to mention though before I end the video, and this is just to kind of set your expectations of what you're going to get out of this before you start building this, because some of these pieces are pretty difficult to grind for. I just want you to know, before you're getting into this, that in no way are you going to be able to dominate in the same way as that you would have done a few patches ago. As I've said before in the video, a lot of things that the better players could do to really make a difference within a fight, it has been nerfed or changed because the developers wanted to tighten up the skill gap. So when you're fighting groups, it isn't just about being mechanically skilled anymore. It isn't about being headshots or timing your skills or timing your medkits. It's also a lot about knowing when to take fights. You really have to try to fight when you see an isolated player. You have to use the walls and the corners to your advantage to block line of sight with everybody except for the player that you're trying to burst down. You only really want to face tank people when there's only one opponent, or when you have your green link up and you feel like that you can go in and use those 2 seconds of invulnerability to get that kill. A good place to do these type of things and be successful as a solo is usually in the underground areas of the Dark Zone, where you have plenty of ways to break line of sight and where you will find plenty of stray red mobs to get your signature skill back faster. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. As always, I will see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.
Best weglaufen, kleine Pussy.
I am inbound on your position. You got a bird inbound on your position. Chopper is inbound. You got a bird inbound on your position.
Rogue agent down.
Chopper is inbound.
Rogue agent neutralized.